If he'd picked every leaf of every plant in my plantation, he could still not have achieved the amount of tea that he was showing me in this bucket.
I mean, there were plenty of other things that were suspicious about it, you know.
Nicknames, they were comparing him to Del Boy.
This is the story of a tea fraud that shook the industry.
Well, he was in the newspapers as Braan, but it transpires his real name is Thomas Robinson.
I honestly have no idea how that got through.
I'm angry, actually, I am.
One that conned the world's tea specialists and the media.
Oh my goodness, you'll never guess what's happened. I made this programme about tea 10 years ago. Blimey, it was all a complete fraud.
I'm Jaega Wise, and this is the Food Programme. Hi.
Hello.
I'm Jaega.
Nice to meet you, Richard.
I'm John.
I'm at Pico Tea, a tea shop in Leith, Edinburgh, for a rather special tea tasting.
I'm John Cooper, and I am the founder of Pico Tea in Edinburgh.
I'm Richard Ross. I'm a drinks writer, and tea grower.
And you've got some teas for us.
Yes, so I'm going to brew it in these glass pots.
So one of them you said is Scottish tea, and the variety is called?
It's Kinettles Gold.
Kinettles Gold.
This is a tea which is grown from clones, so from cuttings, in a polytunnel.
Okay, and which part of Scotland is that from?
It's from Fortnum, so Angus.
Angus, okay. And one of them's Assam, you said. Mm-hmm. And the other one was?
Japanese.
Japanese, okay. So let's go one of those three, please.
So we'll start with this one. If you can you got it?
Handle.
The temperature should be all right now.
Scottish tea? Yes, you did hear that right. And yes, that is tea actually grown in Scotland. And that is central to this story. In June of this year, a man by the name of Thomas Robinson was jailed for 3.5 years for 2 counts of fraud related to tea growing and selling. He sold tea that he claimed was Scottish to luxury food store, Fortnum and Mason, and high-end hotels, including the Dorchester, which was really bog-standard tea bought from a wholesaler. At the same time, he was selling plants to Scottish growers from what he called his Wee Tea Plantation, which he said was uniquely suited to Scottish conditions, when they were actually imported from Italy and he was growing nothing of the kind. But how? And more importantly, why?
So I started with Food Standards Scotland at the end of 2018. And I was aware at that time that there had been information or intelligence about a potential food fraud, i.e. tea, which had been reported into us at Food Standards Scotland.
This is Stuart Wilson, lead investigator of the Scottish Food Crime Unit, who took on the case.
The background to the information that we had was that there was lots of media reports around about the 2014-2015 time. And they were indicating that a chap by the name of, well, he was in the newspapers as Braan, but he transpires his real name is Thomas Robinson. But this time it's February of 2019, and it was allocated to myself for investigation. So there was a number of strands to the investigation. One being, well, who is Braan? You know, there was lots and lots of claims within the media about this individual. There was claims that he was an agronomist, he was a chemist, he was a scientist, he'd served within the army, he'd invented the bag for life, he was a tea expert, and all these type of things. So there was a case of, right, okay, let's do some digging into who he is. And these claims, are they accurate? Is there evidence to back it up or not? We'd identified that the award that he'd claimed to have won didn't appear to be in existence, so there were false claims. We evidenced that he hadn't served in the army. There was no evidence that he'd achieved any academic awards that he claimed to have achieved. There was no evidence that he was a chemist. There was no evidence he was a scientist. So there was lots of things giving credibility to the fact that there was a fraudulent scheme on the go here.
Stuart Wilson, lead food crime investigator at Food Standards Scotland. We'll come back to him shortly. This case piqued my interest for all sorts of reasons. Firstly, as a brewer by trade, I know for a fact that it doesn't take long for a health and safety inspector to come knocking on your door. So, just how did he manage to stay under the radar? And how on earth did he convince the world's top tea buyers that what he was selling was genuine? With that in mind, I wanted to have a go at identifying a legitimate Scottish tea myself. Now, I'm no trained tea buyer, but I am a sommelier with a lot of tastings under my belt. So back at Pico Tea, John and Richard blindfolded me for extra precaution. As a reminder, John is the owner of specialist tea shop Pico Tea, which he's kindly given up for us to run this tasting. Richard is a drinks writer and tea grower. Not just any tea grower. Richard is one of those who was duped by our tea fraudster. More on that to come. Okay, so the blindfold is going on. Tea meat.
I've picked these 3 because they're very distinctive in their flavours. Whether or not you'll be able to pick out the one that's Scottish or not, I don't know, but you should be able to tell the difference between them, that they are completely different.
Okay, could you describe what are some of the typical characteristics you would get from Scottish tea?
So from Kinettle's Gold, what we get is this kind of fruity floral note. It's very light. We were tasting this morning as part of the team, and we got fruitcake, like really strong fruitcake. It's like eating Christmas cake.
Okay, so it's quite light. To me, the one that tastes obviously different to the other 2 was the middle one. Am I correct? Am I not correct? Can I take my blindfold off?
Yes, you are correct. Yes! So the one in the middle is the Kinettle's Gold.
Yes.
So
there you go, my tasting chops ain't that bad. So this simple taste test that we just did, why were tea buyers not able to pick up on this fraud from this simple taste test that we just did?
I think in the first instance, the tea that the Wee Tea Plantation made was white tea. There's a lot of really bad white tea out on the market from China and also other countries that make it, but traditionally it's from China.
Could you just explain what white tea is?
White tea is got a specific definition, but originally white tea was the tea leaves which grew at the beginning of the season after the dormancy over the winter period. So the tea plants would grow store up a lot of nutrients, and then they would start to grow at the start of the season. And at the very beginning, the leaves would have these little white hairs on them, the little leaf buds, and so you'd get this idea of it physically look white, silvery almost. And so it got the term white tea, also known as Pai Mutan or Bai Mudan. But because there's not really a reference point for it, and the high-end Bai Mudan is not particularly common in the UK, he would be able to say, well, you can forgive the fact it's not particularly great tea on the basis that we're growing it in Scotland. So it was not just about the taste. Is that he picked a tea where it didn't have to be good quality. It was about the story, it was about the novelty. They got there first. They had an exclusivity on something which was unique. And I believe that the buyers, they almost didn't want to ask the questions because they'd got this thing that they could sell a story of.
You seem disappointed.
Yeah, I'm disappointed. I am disappointed. I think I'm angry, actually. I am. Talking about it and going through it as we have today, it brings up all the kind of emotion from it, of which there was a lot. I saw how much of an effect it had on the people, and it's not a nice thing to sit and watch that.
Why did no one go there and physically look?
Well, there were pictures, but they were all very young plants in these plastic container things.
A sort of show garden as well, where you had plants that were types of camellia, a little bit like tea, but not actually tea growing, that looked good. They were more ornamental, and he created a bit of a garden which that's what he would show to visitors, and it was very difficult to be shown the working plantation round the back because it wasn't really there.
So I suppose whilst you make the tea, it'd be good to hear the story.
So I first met this person Tam in 2015 when he was getting a lot of publicity, a lot of media interest. He got so much publicity that it built to create this credibility, and a lot of the stories were more of that kind of and finally type story. Here's a funny thing, someone's growing tea in Scotland. And they were treated more like that. It was never really looked at as a hard business story, which might have got a little bit more scrutiny. I was interested in doing something with a bit of land I had in Perthshire. I had a drinks journalist background. I also had a grandfather who was a tea planter in Sri Lanka. So I had grown up with tea as an idea, as a concept. The idea that one could grow tea in Scotland sounded too good an idea to miss. So I arranged to meet the guy. I then agreed to buy 500 tea plants from him, and I took delivery of those in late 2015. We nursed them through a Scottish winter, first of all, and thought that they would then start to really come into their own in the spring. That never really happened. He'd advised us to put them inside plastic tree guards. And he'd already demonstrated the figures that he was expecting us to get in terms of yield. And he had demonstrated that he already had the sales channels. He was selling into places like the Dorchester and Fortnum and Masons by this point. And all that played into my feeling that this was economically viable and worth getting involved in. The plants just didn't really thrive.
What was Tam like as a man?
He played the sort of country gent quite well. You know, he'd dress in tweed and sit in a room with a roaring fire and create this impression of being man of the countryside. When we started to ask questions and started to try and pin him down a bit more about what he was doing and some of the inconsistencies in the stories that started appearing over time, he became increasingly much more difficult to get hold of, much more brittle, much more aggressive in his responses. Looking back on it 10 years later, we've got a lot more experience in growing plants in Scotland. Initially, the plant material we got, the type of plants, simply weren't ever going to really work outdoors in Scotland. And what was extraordinary was the sheer quantities that he was selling. I mean, one wholesaler, he bought more than a ton of tea. And this was all being sold as Scottish-grown tea.
And how do you grow tea in Scotland?
Very carefully and very slowly. I think, some growers are growing under polytunnel, because that just helps to extend the quite slow, short growing season we've got here. Others are growing outside if they're in slightly more temperate areas or a bit more sheltered areas.
In terms of the finished tea product that you were able to get out of the 500 plants, nothing?
Nothing, no. I got none.
That's no sellable tea to speak of. But Scotland's tea growers were not the only people taken in by Thomas Robinson. Far from it. In fact, in 2016, he featured on our Radio 4's On Your Farm, where presenter Kaz Graham visited him at the plantation of another Scottish tea grower. So while we couldn't get through to Tam, or Thomas himself, he is, or shortly will be, a resident of His Majesty's Prison Service, we were able to locate his interview from within the Radio 4 archive.
Tam, you established Scotland's first commercial tea plantation, how long ago? 5 years ago?
Yes, and a lot has happened since then.
So if it's so easy to grow them, and you've got a huge number of tea plants at Dalriach in Perthshire, which is where you've got your Wee Tea Plantation, as you call it, yes. Tam, why hasn't everybody been growing tea?
Well, it was actually a Berwickshire man, Robert Fortune, and he attempted it. He used a lot of his wife's family's money to do that, and it failed. And I think mainly due to the variety. He was relying upon Japanese and Indian plants, as opposed to these ones, the original Chinese tea plant, which grows in the foothills of the Himalayas.
You're sitting here at the moment with a blue plastic bucket. It's full of very green leaves.
We're looking for the tip and the first two leaves. And then you leave, it's that very, very small leaf, the size of your fingernail there at the back.
Yeah.
If you leave that on, in another 3 or 5 weeks, that'll be as big as this one here. I mean, it literally quadruples in size.
How much tea would these leaves that we've got here make?
Well, that's about half a kilo. If we then oxidise that down, this will make us about between 200, 300 grams of tea. The value of that then is dependent upon the accepted value of this type of premium single estate tea. So what you're looking at in that bucket, in half a kilo of leaf, is about 200 pounds of tea.
£200 worth of value of tea?
Yeah, and when I say if you could pick the leaf really carefully, there's a good reason for that.
So what's going to happen to this tea now? Where's it going to go?
This tea leaves here and comes with me to Perthshire, where we have at Dalriach some very slow and specific ovens which were designed for basically oxidising leaf and baking the tea through to a finished product. The stresses that the Scottish weather put these plants through mean that the leaf grows slower, but that gives a longer period of time for the flavour to come through. Because of that, when we send the tea for grading, we're making good quality tea which, when people taste it, it's original. It's not faux Lapsang Souchong. We're not just trying to copy what somebody else is doing in another country. It's a unique Scottish flavour.
Listening to that now, it's quite incredible to think of what he got away with. There were no Chinese tea varieties, bred to be bespoke to Scottish conditions. And the tea, as we know now, was not quite so original as he made out. Here's Kaz Graham, the presenter and producer on that episode, and who interviewed Thomas at the time.
I'm telling that story now to my friends. Oh my goodness, you'll never guess what's happened. I made this programme, this On Your Farm about tea 10 years ago. And blimey, it was all a complete fraud.
And in hindsight, Kaz, I mean, are there any red flags when you listen back to the programme?
I tried initially to go and see him on his tea plantation in Perthshire, but there always seemed to be some reason why we couldn't go there. There was always something that was going on, something wasn't going to be available, the tea wasn't at quite the right stage, so I never went. And, well, now it seems pretty obvious why I didn't go.
How far do you feel that you yourself were duped? I mean, you're a very experienced food and farming journalist. I mean, what does that feel like?
When I saw the story in the news that he'd gone to court, I just couldn't quite believe it. But then, when you think about it, yeah, it's appalling that we, the media, we were all taken in by him. But, you know, it happens, doesn't it? There are lots of people doing fraudulent things out there. We hear about a lot of food fraud. We hear about a lot of stories of people who aren't actually quite who they say they are. So in some ways, it might not be all that surprising.
Were there any doubts at all in your mind with what he was doing?
Do you know, there were no doubts in my mind whatsoever. And now when I look back at it, I mean, I still think I would have done exactly the same thing again today, because he was selling his tea to Fortnum and Mason. The tea was going on the afternoon tea menu at the Dorchester Hotel. As a producer on a radio programme, I assume that those people will have done their due diligence and that they won't be putting anything fraudulent on their menus. So for me, that was pretty well good enough. And then when I met him and heard about his comprehensive knowledge of tea making and tea and the intricacies of it, you know, no more alarm bells rang, really. I mean, he was so convincing. He was talking about the next developments, what they were going to do in the future. He really seemed absolutely the genuine article. I wonder why he did it. That's the big question that I have. I mean, did he think it was going to make him an absolute fortune? Did it make him a fortune? I mean, obviously he got found out in the end, but I mean, there must be easier ways of making money. I don't really know. It's a great story, isn't it? But of course, he took a lot of people for a ride, and he deceived people, and he took money from people for something that was totally fraudulent.
Some people have suggested the media, including Radio 4, as well as many of the outlets that covered the story, were partially to blame for not doing enough due diligence. And that is why other tea growers and buyers trusted him. What would you say to that?
I can understand people saying that. However, I think that we, the media, picked up on the fact that the really high-end retailers were selling his product, and they just wouldn't be doing that if he wasn't kosher. They should have done the checks. Why wouldn't they? I mean, we wouldn't imagine that if we were buying tea from somewhere that's really high-end and known for selling the best foods possible, why wouldn't they have done the checks themselves?
Why indeed? The more I looked into this, the question of just who was responsible was becoming more and more complicated.
I'm Beverly Wainwright, and I'm a tea expert living and working in Scotland. I first came across Tam whilst I was living and working in Sri Lanka, where I was managing a small tea estate, and I received a phone call out of the blue from a gentleman. Tam Braan was the name he gave at that point. Well, basically telling me about this incredible tea project he had in Scotland. All sorts of things were mentioned, his army background and lots of other stories. And he was quite charming over the phone. Frankly, it sounded quite exciting. The first time I met Mr. O'Brien in person was in court. I started working in tea in Sri Lanka 12 years ago now, probably, where I was taken on to increase and improve livelihoods on a tea estate.
Okay, so you've got pretty major experience in small-scale tea production in terms of turning that into a viable business. So you're the person to go to for lots of Scottish producers.
Yes, I have quite a unique experience in hands-on tea production. How do you make a tea that is authentic and unique from scratch? And that takes experimentation and time to work out how to choose the best method to produce your tea in your environment with your leaf.
With her specialist knowledge of small-scale tea making, Beverly was one of the first to suspect that what Thomas was doing wasn't quite right.
I was really curious, knowing how difficult it is to grow tea and what tea required. Nonetheless, people find ways of doing things, and my first reaction was, oh, how interesting, let's learn a bit more. But I became suspicious when I actually saw the tea that he was supposedly growing and producing in Scotland. Yes, he could smoke it, I'm sure. You can buy a smoking kit and, do that. But the white tea he was selling as Scottish grown, it looked like a Baimudan from China to me. Had huge buds, huge tips, and none of the tea plants in Scotland that I'd ever seen had anything like that. When I saw the tea, that's when I started to be a bit suspicious about what he was doing. And the biggest red light for me with Tam O'Brien was the fact that he was selling tea 2 years after planting it. 2 years after planting it in his own ground, he was selling tea. Nobody in the world is doing that. Believe you me, if it could be done, China would be doing it. It is not done anywhere. So how was he doing that? Not possible.
Now, remember at this point, the height of Thomas Robinson's fame, his tea was being lauded in the media, in the finest afternoon tea lounges, and even, it was said, delivered to Barack Obama as a gift from the Scottish government. Back at home, Beverly was seeing a different story.
I mean, there were plenty of other things that were suspicious about it. When he started selling supposed Scottish matcha. I mean, if you understand how matcha is grown and produced, with the amount of plants in Scotland, it was just not possible to produce anything like what he was selling. Scottish oolong, it's a complex tea to produce. It requires complicated equipment and a lot of skill. And where was all the equipment? Where was it? So, things like that. And also, if you've ever tried to make an oolong, I mean, I've made an oolong in Mississippi with the Great Mississippi Tea Company, for example. The work that goes in, it took me years to get the recipe, to get the method right. And then you start at 7 in the morning and you're still making the tea at 3 the next morning. And, there was a lot of equipment involved. There was no evidence that there was any production of this kind anywhere. And if you're buying tea from someone and they can't show you their tea-making equipment, don't buy it. Because tea is not a trade secret. It's been made for centuries. So if you can't see production, if they won't show you the tea machinery and how they make the tea, then be suspicious is my advice. One of the other reasons why it was easy to, I suppose, dupe people, if you want to use that term, is because people don't understand how tea is made. They don't understand what's needed to grow it. It's one of those things we have in our cupboard. It's a sort of everyday thing, but we don't understand much about it. And you've got people thinking that Yorkshire tea is grown in Yorkshire, for example, which is absolutely ridiculous.
How do you feel generally about some of the places where the Wee Tea Plantation were able to sell their tea?
Yeah, they should have done more due diligence, really. These are places that had extensive tea menus and were supposedly had tea experts, tea sommeliers that were selling, that were promoting the tea, and it was being given as a tea experience. Well, as a tea sommelier, if you don't know how matcha is made, well, it's a pretty poor show. If you don't understand by looking at the white tea and asking a few questions, again, it's a pretty poor show. And they should have demanded to see where it was being produced, frankly, because they were paying a lot of money for that tea. So more questions needed to have been asked from the buyers. Perhaps people should be a bit less trusting for very special new foods that are being produced all of a sudden.
We contacted those top hotels and shops, the Dorchester in London, the Balmoral in Edinburgh, and Fortnum and Mason, to ask about their involvement with Thomas Robinson and what due diligence their buyers did. They declined to talk. We also contacted the Wee Tea Company, a Scottish tea company, not to be confused with Robinson's own Wee Tea Plantation, which sold his tea on their website. And they told us.
The Wee Tea Company had, in good faith, retailed some of Thomas Robinson's tea, believing it to be genuine and Scottish grown as he claimed. We were never aware of any dishonesty and have never grown tea ourselves.
But back to Beverley. You were an expert witness at the trial. What was that like?
Well, originally I was, because I reported Mr. O'Brien about 8 years ago. So I worked with Food Standard Scotland for 8 years on lots and lots and lots of reports, looking at the area of land he had, looking at the number of plants he had, looking at all the claims he was making, why those claims might be true or not true.
Beverley began working with an academic from Aberdeen University, Professor David Burslam. Together, they became a crucial cog in the efforts to bring him to justice. And this is where things become even more interesting, because how they did it could actually be one of the most positive outcomes of this whole thing.
We were able to develop a test which identified a relationship between plants' chemistry and the soils in which they're growing.
Plants grown in different soils have a different mineral composition, which can, it turns out, be used as a basis for a proof of origin.
So tea that's grown in Scotland on Scottish soils derived from the underlying geology of Scotland will have a different elemental profile, so different concentrations of these rare elements than tea that's grown, for instance, in India or China.
Working with Beverley, David created a library of 100 tea samples from Scotland and overseas, plotting their results on a graph.
When the Food Crime Unit passed us samples that had been seized, we determined that they clustered within the group of overseas teas and not with the Scottish grown teas. So there was a clear evidence that they had not been grown in Scotland on that basis. Similar approaches are used quite widely in food and drink geographical authentication in many products, but to my knowledge, it hadn't been used for tea before in this way.
Given there is now a mapping tool for proving its origin, could Scottish tea now, in fact, be more authentic, thanks to the fraud case?
Absolutely. It's definitely the basis for a testing system that could be developed. And on the back of that, perhaps a labelling system as well that could be applied to genuine Scottish grown tea. I would love to be involved in that. And there are ways in which the test could be developed further using more modern methods even to make that even more precise. So we could do authentication to individual plantations, rather like whiskey gains value because it is identified with a particular distillery. One could, in principle, do the same for Scottish grown tea.
What about the limitations? Could this test be effective in blocking fraud in all tea?
There are ways in which a sophisticated fraudster could get around it, for instance, by growing tea in hydroponic systems, where they manipulate the chemical environment that the tea is growing in. That would allow them to circumvent any kind of authentication system based on this multi-element profiling. Another limitation is that what we can't do is detect whether there's a small quantity of, say, Scottish grown tea in a bulk sample. So it works well for pure origin. It doesn't work well for blended products. And a lot of tea is blended.
So perhaps not a fix-all solution. But nevertheless, we now have a fraud conviction, a jail term, a new proof of origin test, and more knowledge about Scottish tea itself. Surely it's in a good place. But there was still one problematic element: the public reaction.
Thomas Robinson, how much did he make?
Millions.
$500,000,
right,
by fraudulently claiming Scottish Atlas tea was grown on a plantation in Perthshire, when in fact he'd just imported cheap tea by the ton from abroad.
Yes.
The head of food standards in Scotland, Ron McNaughton, said this was a highly complex and protracted investigation which required a significant amount of time and expertise. Expertise which required asking, is there a tea plantation on Mr. Robinson's farm in Perthshire? No.
That was a clip satirising this whole story on a recent Have I Got News For You episode, which to my mind is quite telling. The fact that the public finds out that food or drink is being sold as something it's not and simply laughs is a bit of a worry. But the thing is, in this case at least, you can kind of see why. Tea that is sold and traded for thousands of pounds per kilo surely has little relevance to most of us. Come to think of it, why does elite single origin tea matter? So for the final part of our story, I'm outside the Mandarin Oriental Hotel in Knightsbridge, West London, because I've managed to get a pass into what is widely considered to be the most prestigious tea awards, the Leafies, to find out how the world's top tea tasters work. Would a fraudulent tea get past them? And what they made of our Scottish tea fraud case. Let's go taste some tea.
It's got some fantastic aroma, hasn't it, this one?
Really.
Yeah. It's really well balanced.
Any feedback on this?
No feedback.
Okay.
In the panelled rooms of the Mandarin's Aubrey restaurant, amid the hushed clinking of cups, the slurping and note-taking from some of the world's most well-respected tea tasters was underway.
Not as vibrant as the previous ones, isn't it?
We had a too good one.
Leaving the judges hard at work, I sat down with Jen Wood and Finbar Lillis from the UK Tea Academy, UKTA, the organisation that runs the Leafies and trains tea sommeliers from all over the world.
You know, here today we have Taiwan, Japan, Sri Lanka, India, Africa, China, all over the world. They are all absolute regional specialists.
It's very difficult as an outsider to get a feel for how a fraudster was able to get so much tea onto the market and it not be noticed for years.
Yes. What he did manage to do was get it into some key places by some fantastic smoke and mirrors and fraud. I mean, look how fraudsters work. They're very clever. They can blag their way through.
I think he was very, very good at bullshitting his way in, frankly. He's extremely good at doing it.
But to be frank, shouldn't the procedures that buyers have in place, stream out the bullshit?
Because I think if you saw the case and see how he managed it, he was very, very, very good at it.
I guess people just don't know what Scottish tea should taste like. There isn't much of it. There's like 2 kilos a year. I never tasted this guy's tea, but I honestly have no idea how that got through.
The fact that you were hoping to train more people in order to be able to spot any issues or etc.
Yes.
Could you talk me through that?
I think really the best way of being able to spot authenticity is through education. So the UKTA is out there for people to learn from absolute scratch, people who know nothing whatsoever about tea. We'll teach them about the categories, we'll teach them about brewing techniques, teach them about what tea actually is, how it is grown, how it is processed. And the more they learn, the more confident they're going to have about what they're buying and where they're buying it from. I mean, you can see the judges here today, as soon as the dry leaf comes out and the liquor and the wet leaf, they're looking at the gloss on the leaf, they're looking at the quality of the picking standard, they're getting the aroma from the cupping set, the volatile oils that are trapped in there. And they know immediately, how good that is. And then when they taste the liquor, they know whether it follows through and does what is expected from the look and the smell. The closer people get to understanding that, the more they're going to be able to assess the quality of the tea they're drinking and buying.
Has anything changed in the tea industry since that big fraud case, do you think?
We're going to investigate whether we should create a membership structure for UKTA, because the knowledge of who does what is anecdotal and informal, and everyone that's inside the tea sector knows who's who, but the public doesn't necessarily have access to that knowledge. So we can do something about that. Scottish tea will be included in that, as will the European tea, and then you'd know where to go to find out. So who is this guy in those circumstances? Well, if you don't know what we know, he can be whoever he wants to be.
It was time to get back to the judging, and spotting a pause in the slurping, I took my chance.
I hope you guys don't mind me just invading the table.
I'm Will Battle. I'm the managing director of a wholesaler called Fine Tea Merchants.
I'm Carrie Hex. I am a tutor for the UK Tea Academy, and I also work with a tea company. I'm an account manager for them, so I work in the 5-star sort of luxury sector.
I'm Chow Jean Lin. I'm the co-founder of Maru Lin, and I have a tea farm in Taiwan.
So this particular tea, I would love for you to talk me through how I taste.
Well, first of all, I'd have a look at the leaf, because that's quite a good start at telling you, the quality of the plucking. If it's even, then it's a good chance it might be a good tea. But here you can see,
I can see all
there's
sorts.
a big chunk,
I can see long,
and then
I can see chunky.
And that's suggestive that it's not necessarily really been manufactured with great care. And you can see that on the infusion as well, which is the next thing you need to look at.
And then what you might want to do is also, after you've infused the tea, you want to put your nose into this cup. So, yes.
This is the yellow tea category.
Yes, so you can get elements of the aroma in that cup, which should translate into the actual liqueur.
Yes, so the liquor, when you taste a yellow tea, you're expecting a kind of gentle, soft, round, almost like an edamame bean flavour to it, which is the result of the manufacturing method. And I always say with yellow tea that the comparison between green tea is when you have green tea, it's quite a fresh, grassy note. And yellow tea to me is always like green tea with the edges knocked off. Like when you bake an apple in the oven, it goes soft and creamy and sweeter than if you eat a fresh apple. And to me, that's the difference between yellow tea and green tea, because they sort of start off in the same way, but then the manufacturing method takes them to a different level and a different category.
We've been following the Scottish tea fraud case, and I was wondering whether any of you had come across it and what your thoughts were generally on the case.
When it was out in the market, and I didn't buy any. It's not the sort of thing that my company deal in, but I think certainly for us, when we're looking at new suppliers, tea is an industry where it's very people driven, and we visit pretty much all our main suppliers.
How do I put it? We heard about it, but in Taiwan, authenticity of tea is actually quite regulated. The tea industry can be dodgy in its supply chain, like what happened in Scotland. It's kind of like what happens in coffee as well. So sometimes you have to think to yourself, if that year you have a certain harvest and it's yielding a certain production and the amount that's being sold is greater than that, then you do wonder where the tea comes from.
To your point, though, if you really know your supply base, that is the best safeguard, really, isn't it? Knowing who you're buying from, yes. Being able to trust them. Yes. And I do think in the tea industry, lots of these relationships are built up over very, very long periods of time. And I'm dealing with people I've dealt with for sort of 28 years. And I don't think there's a substitute for really knowing the individuals behind your tea.
I mean, who do you think is responsible for ensuring the authenticity of high-end tea in the UK?
The individual buying the tea. The person transacting with the tea estate is responsible for ensuring that they're buying an authentic tea. And if they're reputable, then they will do that.
Because as part of this story, there's been kind of a circle of blame surrounding the Scottish fraud case. You've got buyers saying, well, it was publicised so much in the media, and lots of people from the media saying, well, we're not tea experts. How are we supposed to know whether it was authentic or not? It's very difficult to pin down who's responsible for him being able to get away with such a big scale fraud for such a long time.
I think everyone wanted it to be true because it was such an amazing thing. But now there are people growing tea in Scotland, some amazing women growing tea on estates. And it is beautiful tea. And it's had such a detriment, this case. They've had to fight very hard to confirm their own authenticity. I think it was a lot of smoke and mirrors from a clever man who got people to believe something that they wanted to believe. There was a statistic recently that something like 25% of adults in the UK think that the tea that they drink is grown in the UK. And we're talking about English breakfast. People have no idea about tea. So it's not really surprising, but that should be changing and is changing.
I think you're seeing part of the solution here today, actually. The level of training outside of the major tea packers in this country is streets ahead of what it was 15, 20 years ago. With the Tea Academy, the level of training that food and beverage staff are given now compared to what it was 15 years ago is a lot further advanced. There's a lot of really good literature out there on tea. So I think the tea enthusiast is much better educated now than they were then. I think that is part of the solution.
For people who've never drank high-end tea before, is it worth drinking?
Definitely worth drinking. I mean, tea is the most diverse product in the world, bar none. There's almost no limit to what you can do with a leaf. You can drink a different tea every day of your life and never come back to the same one again. There's just an enormous variety out there. It's unparalleled as a product for delivering variety and these amazing drinking experiences. Definitely, yes, go out and try a cup of tea. It's an amazing product.
This story has given me a lot to think about. As a brewer, a drinks expert and a journalist, I have been shocked that this fraud slipped under the radar of the authorities, the media, and even the world's top tea buyers. There are surely lessons there about asking more questions, actually visiting producers and not simply taking social media or even the traditional media, for that matter, as a guarantee of truth. And then there's the public reaction, which I found the most surprising. People still don't think food fraud, or for that matter, food itself, is serious business. That's something the food programme has been attempting to tackle for years. As this is mine and producer Nina Pullman's second food programme investigating food fraud, you can listen to our episode from last year on food fraud in herbs and spices on BBC Sounds. I also began to wonder, why stop here? What should we uncover next? Feel free to send any tip-offs to the food programme at bbc.co.uk. We are at your service. This has all been quite a tale, because if there's one thing about us Brits, we love a story almost as much as we love a good cup of tea. So I don't know about you, but I'm off to put the kettle on.